What's going on, everybody? I'm Vinny Costa, editor of Street Muscle Magazine, and your host of the RodCAST, the all-encompassing car show where we talk about all things automotive. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Greg Acosta, editor of Engine Labs and all-around tech guru. What's going on, Greg?
Hey, Vinny, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. Dude, you look so good.
I know.
Like
pardon my audio. It's like over there.
No,
like,
man.
I took everything apart and didn't have all the parts to put it back together.
Dude,
so.
this a pandemic has created this workspace where people are just upping their technology. Like, you look fantastic, man. Super good HD. I have yet to upgrade my camera, but really good, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. This all actually comes out of people price gouging. Well, because I mean, my original webcam, that I had was like $50. And that's just how much they are. But supply and demand, they're all out of stock. So they started going up to $200. And I was like, well, for $200, I can get a DSLR, and just rig it up as a webcam. So, I mean, I know that sounds like, first world problems and stuff, oh, I got my DSLR as a webcam. But yeah, so I mean, it
was well worth it, and it's totally cool, and it's cost effective. So I'm sure our viewers and our listeners appreciate it. Any case, we have a very special show today, man. It's a little bit of a departure from our normal kind of car talk. This is a lot more tech focused. So this is totally in your wheelhouse.
Tech talk, yep.
Yeah, exactly. I am probably not the person qualified to introduce our two guests. Our viewers and listeners will certainly know the first name, Jeff Smith, back from episode, I believe it was 20. And we're also joined by Billy Godbold, a good friend of both of yours. Greg, I'll let you handle the intro.
All right. Well, as I like to say, and I actually am saying in something that publishes tomorrow morning, Billy Godbold is our favorite nuclear physicist who happens to like cars, right? Billy, I mean, you are legitimately a nuclear physicist, correct?
That's my background. Yes, I got my Florida State working with the nuclear physics group.
And why anybody should care about that, if you have a cam designed from Comp Cams in the past, I don't know how many years?
25.
25. Billy has had a hand in designing those lobes. So that's Billy Godbold. I mean, there you go.
On, man. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for making the time to do this, Billy.
Oh, thank you guys for having us. We really appreciate it.
Jeff, thank you to you as well. We really appreciate your time.
We're going from nuclear physicist to bluffing my way through an Iowa State degree.
Oh, BS. BS.
Yeah, that's what he got.
That's exactly what it is. It's a Bachelor of Science. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Ding, 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 ding.
And I chose that specifically, too. They give you a choice. But right before they had you, they said, you want a Bachelor of Humanities or Bachelor of Science? It's like, a Bachelor of Science. It just makes sense.
Well, at this point in both of your careers, I doubt anybody's going to argue with the fact that you guys are the tech guys, which is why you guys are here today, to shed some light on some recent articles that have published on enginelabs.com. Jeff, you were the pen behind the sword, as it were, because there was some controversy that these articles caused for some reason. And so I thought, what better way to get to the bottom of this than to have you guys on the show and talk about it, firsthand. So, Jeff, I want to get right into it. The first article that kind of caused this whole first part of this was an article called Project Spinal Tap, What's Inside an 11,000 RPM LS engine, right? Yeah, LS race engine, excuse me.
Yeah.
So can you just give us a little bit of a background on that story? What was the goal of the article, and what caused this controversy?
Well, Billy was intrinsically involved at the very beginning. It was basically a collaboration with you and Ben Strader at EFI University on building an 11,000 RPM engine that would achieve that RPM reliably. And so as soon as I heard about it, was like, do we have to talk about this? Because there's got to be 1,000 details in this.
Sorry, I tried to share the article, And apparently the software doesn't like that. So I'm not touching that anymore. Sorry. That was 100% my
Not
fault.
going to go there. Not going to go there. Anyway, the point was like, let's talk about all the different details that Ben went into. But the big thing really was the valve train. And that's what I tried to focus on. I think, in fact, there were two parts to that story. And a big part of it, the first part of it was the valve train stuff. So I just had a chance to go back over this a little bit today for just a few minutes. And it was fun. Your quote, Billy, was because of kinetic energy, right? So the definition of kinetic energy, and it was it 1/2 mass mv squared, and your quote was, it's the v squared part that gets you in trouble.
Yeah, squared terms kick your butt, I think it's my
yes because you square the velocity and it's like, yikes, things happen very, very fast. And one of the more interesting comments, because you guys posted a ton of stuff on Facebook when you were doing the Spintron work, and it was interesting how many people thought that the Spintron was a dyno because of the way it sounded. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're only just running one cylinder, correct?
No, we run on a V8. We'll run all 8 cylinders because there's so much torsional. And you open up when you're opening up a valve that quick, you have several thousand pounds of pushrod load. And when I say several, I mean like not 2, like 6 or 8,000 sometimes, but certainly 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of force. And that force on the pushrod through the lifter starts to slow down the cam on the opening side and throw it forward on the closing. So if you take an even fire V8 and you try to run that as a single cylinder, it does the happy dance that's not happy. Yeah.
Okay, so dynamically, it makes sense to run all 8 then.
You have to run all 8 to get good data. Like the stuff we'd run like in a pro stock bike, say a Vance & Hines pro stock bike, that profile can't be nearly as fast as something going to NHRA pro stock, because the NHRA pro stock has all 16 valves opening and closing, dampening out a lot of that, where the V-Rod, or whatever they call it today, but that V-twin, has some really goofy going on between the front and rear cylinder and an odd fire V-twin. Yeah. So we don't want to make our V8 into some sort of Briggs or Harley.
Right. So the valve train dynamics was the whole key to the whole thing, and the rest of it was really just involved with making the engine live and then minimizing friction, because friction becomes a huge component when you're spinning 11,000 RPM. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So then we, jumping ahead into the article, when we ran into a bunch of comments in the comment section, I mean, the original article got a few thousand shares, a bunch of comments, and then on Facebook it went crazy. Greg can probably speak more to that, but there was a particular picture, and we'll throw that up, of that rod side clearance that you were talking about a moment ago, and it says, if that looks like a massive amount of rod side clearance, you'd be correct. The rods are actually piston centered, leaving 120 thousandths of an inch of clearance on all sides, between the crank on both sides and in between the rods. This is intentional to reduce friction. Tight 18 thousandths of an inch and rod and main bearing clearances reduce the oil flow as well. And that was the photo and the caption that set this whole thing off. Can you speak to that, Jeff?
Yeah, and we knew it would when Ben and I were talking about it, when he was showing me the pieces. I said, this one photo is going to send a lot of people spinning off into space, and it did. And so I went back to him later and I said, we need to do this story. And he was less than enthusiastic, let's put it that way, because he just didn't want to get involved with a bunch of people calling him and telling him he's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about, when in reality. So my story, what I did was I started the story off by saying, yes, the Smokey Unick and John Lingenfelder and Bill Grumpy Jenkins all say to run these relatively tight clearances, but with the exception of the Lingenfelder book, those other 2 books were written in the 70s. And a lot of things have changed. They were not running, very tight bearing clearances. They were running very loose bearing clearances. So in the story, we actually talked about, we computed the restriction Where was the restriction? And it was at the bearing. So the side clearance really had nothing to do with it, even though those books, again, written in the 70s, said you got to keep the bearing clearance tight, the rod side clearance tight. So it really was a situation where this is the evolution. This is a great example of the evolution of race engine building. We don't build race engines today like they did in the 70s. And that's part of the evolution. And it's a learning process, and it will take a while, because we hear all kinds of, especially I write stories, I get responses back from readers all the time when you attack a wives tale, that is accepted, and then you say, well, it's not really that way anymore. People get upset, and I think it's interesting that people will get really what it's about. And so you don't take it I don't take it as an attack on me, but it's just, you're telling me the world is flat. It's like, well, no, you think the world is flat, but in reality it's round. So we were just trying to show this to you. That's all,
Jeff, the piston technology has just changed dramatically too. I was looking at a NASCAR piston the other day, and you look down around the pin side at how short the pin is compared to an old school pin, how boxed in that design is. And then, once you have a really, really modern structure on the piston, it changes the whole calculus of everything, right? Because sort of like belts or suspenders, you want one of them to do the job, not both of them. They don't want to fight each other. So if you're going to guide on the pin side, you really don't want to try to guide on the journal side too.
Right.
If you're guiding on both sides and anything gets out of kilter, they try to fight each other. So you've got to pick, am I guiding here or am I guiding there? Kind of like guys that used to run like shaft mounted rockers with guide plates. And you probably, you're old enough. I'm not going to tell your age, but you're old enough to remember when that happened. And you know exactly what the push rods would come out looking like a politician. They'd be
right. Yep. Or the other side of that is, and this does happen, guide plates with guided rockers.
Yeah.
And, that's nasty when that happens,
They're going to, if you try to guide something two places, eventually they're going to get in a fight.
Yep.
So does that mean that theoretically you could have a looser tolerance on one of those sides? And
you want to have a loose on one of the two sides.
Right.
That other one always is guiding it, right? Either loose on the top and guided on the bottom, or loose on the bottom and guided on the top. It can't be tight on both sides, or they will get into a messy divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a preferred, in your experience? Is it better to do one side or the other?
Well, the nice thing about when you look at Spinal Tap and what was done there, the beauty of guiding it on the top was it allows the engine builder to go in there and keep trimming the rod and bearing to reduce friction. So, say if you start out with, just throw out a number, 1/2 inch, then you go, well, that bearing looks great. Go 400 thousandths, then go 350, then go 300. You can take steps down, and all it takes is going over the lathe or milling machine, trimming that bearing down, trimming that rod down. And so if you're guiding on the top, you have all the freedom to do that on the bottom. If you're guiding on the bottom, clearly you can't trim the whole package. You could trim the bearing inside of it, but nice thing about it is you can take the weight out by trimming the whole package if you're guiding up top.
Interesting.
Does that make sense? Since you're guiding one place, then it gives tremendous freedom on the other end.
Yeah,
certainly. Yeah, you would run into some type of binding issue and eventually breakage, I would imagine.
Yes, right. You can't. Grumpy, Bill wasn't wrong. John Lingenfelter wasn't wrong. Smokey wasn't wrong with their combination, because they were guiding on the bottom. They had to have X amount of clearance so it didn't bind up, but no more than X or it would start, wandering off.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to control the system.
So you guys have spintrons and all this like fancy technology to figure that out. What were those guys doing to figure that out back then?
These guys were amazing. I mean, I had a conversation with Bill one time, and he'd gone from a small journal cam to a big journal cam. And he, calls up and he gets us, really, this camshaft's too big, and it's kind of like, he got his name totally legitimately, sounded just rough. And I'm like, Bill, it's not too big. You know, check it, put a dial indicator on the lifter, run it around. It's the right size. And so he goes, click. You know, he didn't even say yes or no. He goes, well, it wasn't too big, but it acts too big. Make it, but keep it as big as it is at 200. Click. That was a long conversation with Bill. You know, that's kind of how he went. And what it took me a long time to do is I was able to go back on the Spintron then and measured, and like the camshaft really was, we started measuring durations, dynamic duration on Spintron. Like, hey, this one with the big journal really is big. Then a few years later, a few $100,000 later, Scooter bought us this great FEA software. ANSYS had just come out. So we had this ANSYS FEA software, like literally costing the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we took the push rod loads we measured, and we looked at the bending of the rocker arm and the push rod and the camshaft. And daggum, if it didn't bend about the right amount, it bent like 14 thousandths. And you look at what 14 thousandths would be, and you're like, oh, this one bends 14 thousandths more. Well, that's almost exactly 2 degrees. Bill, on one pull on the dyno, knew how much the cam shrunk. It took me $500,000 worth of hardware and software to figure out the same thing that he did in a couple of dyno pulls. So never, ever underestimate that generation of guys. That you know, Lingenfelter, I never worked with Smokey, but I worked with John Lingenfelter tremendously, one of my dear friends. I got the blessing to work with Bill, great guy. Bob Glidden, this whole team, Harvey Crane, all those guys from that side, they didn't have the tools we had today. They didn't have the computers. They didn't have the high-speed processing. But those guys understood engines. Like they could mentally sit on the top of the dome of the piston, ride it up and down, and think about the air coming in and out, think about the flame travel, think about what all was going on. They were able to do some things that just blow our minds. You know, kind of like when somebody said Dale Earnhardt could do CFD in his head behind the car and think about where the air was going. He swore he felt it in his mustache. The engine gifted. They could, I don't know if they could feel it in their mustache, but they somehow had this idea of what was going on inside. Just absolutely amazing.
And I think to that end, one thing that Ben has always said is that everything we do, there's almost an aspect of religion to it. So when you challenge somebody on it, you know, it's like challenging someone's religion. Yeah. And I think the older generation, and, you know, I say that because they are, you know, the idols.
Easy.
But they kind of helped, you know, create this aura of they were almost deities because, like you're saying, Billy, they were able to do in their head what it takes this generation a ton of equipment to do. And so that's why I think some of the religion aspect comes into play. And it's like, oh, well, these guys, they know. You need a computer to tell you. You can't possibly be right. These guys know. So I think that's some of what's being fought with the, you know, like when Jeff had to write the article saying, no, this is fine.
I love the way he addressed it too. He said so much as called them keyboard warriors or something like that. It was great. I loved it.
And you know, not to make those guys wrong, because there's so much more information that they still, you know, even today, if they were all still here, you know, how much more they would know, you know, just intrinsically.
And that's what I guess what I was trying to say when I went into the like a squirrel off about the piston. Without the changes in piston design, the pin-guided rod wouldn't be possible. Without the pin-guided rod, what they said was impossible really was impossible in that day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I think everybody, you know, all of us here deal with is people who know something because they stopped learning 20 years ago because they knew everything. Yeah. Billy, I'm sorry, Jeff, but Billy, you're probably the smartest person here, right?
Absolutely.
When was the last time you learned something?
Today. Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly.
You know, the thing is, if you can have an interaction with someone and not learn anything, you are the dummy, not them. I saw this thing online someplace, and this guy, the first guy had ever climbed every mountain, the tallest mountain on every continent, all 7 continents. And he's on a flight back someplace in first class. He sits by a guy and he spends like 4 hours on this flight from New York to LA. And when the flight's about over, he goes, "Oh, I didn't let you talk. Is there anything you want to tell me?" He's like, "No." And he goes, "Oh, by the way, I'm Neil Armstrong."
Wow.
Nice to meet you. Wow. Yeah.
I don't want to run my mouth for 4 hours and find out I'm sitting next to Neil Armstrong. So,
Yeah, that would ruin your whole day.
yeah.
Yeah.
Greg,
And that's really, the beauty of what I do. What makes my job so much fun is that every day I learn something new, because I'm challenged to write new things and or to update old things and make them new. And so, I mean, literally every day learn something, and it's a lot of fun. I get paid to do research and then merely just take that information and put it in some sort of logical sense, hopefully, and then people learn from it. So
Jeff,
it's fantastic.
When you saw this feedback coming from your original Spinal Tap article, what was your thought process on how you wanted to address it and how you wanted to kind of settle that debate?
Well, it was just another opportunity, it's another learning opportunity, really. It's like, well, let's expand on this and go into the details and then do the math, and then that should handle it. So, that was really the thought process behind it. Was it's another opportunity. It's kind of like some philosopher somewhere said, we walk into a room, you open a door, and there's another room with 10 more doors. That's what every story is. My ex-father-in-law used to be so concerned that I would run out of story ideas, and I said, no. You do one story and it leads to 10 more. And you just pick the best one and attack that one, and it just takes you down these paths of learning. It's fantastic stuff.
Well, Jeff, if you guys will humor me for just a moment, I'd like to take a look at that second article that you're referencing right now, and just read an excerpt, and then allow you the opportunity to kind of dive a little bit deeper and explain and just jump into that thought process that you're just describing.
Okay.
All right. There was a part that I am looking for. Here it is. Okay, so again, referencing the original photo that I was talking about previously in the Spinal Tap article, it says, this photo is what initiated this story. EFI University's Spinal Tap crankshaft and connecting rod package. Note, there is a ton of lateral clearance between the rods and the crank. The Spinal Tap engine uses a piston-guided connecting rod that is intended to reduce friction. This technique is used in thousands of competition engines around the world. And then it goes on to say, for those who demand we cut right to the chase, the gap between a pair of connecting rods does not control the amount of oil leakage past the connecting rods. You would be safe carving that into stone above your workbench. The forum experts are already firing up their poison keypads, and that's okay. It's also not enough to flatly state this position without reinforcing this statement with a few facts. We'll also save you the trouble of informing us that Bill Jenkins, Smokey Unick, and John Lingenfelter have all authored respected engine books that state that rod side clearance determines oil flow off the connecting rod journals. And then you go on to say, this is a direct quote from the Jenkins book, The Chevrolet Racing Engine. We also check side clearance in the normal manner. For drag racing or circle racing, we use 15 to 20 thousandths of an inch. Opening the clearance beyond this tolerance leads to excessive oiling to the cylinder walls, making oil control difficult for the rings, and increases the engine oil pump volume and or volume requirements. And I'll stop there. But Jeff, I know that you went back and you read these articles earlier. This one was wildly popular. It's got 15,000 shares. Do you remember what the arguments you made were? And can you speak to those?
Well, I think it was just, to show the Jenkins information, but we didn't go into oil viscosities and bearing clearances, but they were probably running, Billy, what, 3.5 thousandths clearance with 20 W50?
Oh, yeah. Oil? You didn't go up, wasn't there a rule of thumb by RPM too? So as you went up the RPM, they increased clearance, and it was based on pin size. And so, there was a lot of little tricks that went into their formulas back then.
And so that obviously colored their decisions. And Jenkins obviously had seen, if I increase the clearance too much, because he had such a huge, rod bearing clearance, an actual physical bearing clearance, that then was larger. I don't recall that I did that math, but I think if we did, you would see that it would at some point, the side clearance would then become the restriction. So, but now with current engines, you're down very, very tight clearances. I don't know, with NASCAR guys, I've heard 1.5 thou, something like that, on a 1/800 journal, something like that. We run, and they're running 0 weight oils or close to it. So all of that stuff has an effect on volume, because they want to minimize the volume as well. They don't want they don't want a lot of oil splashing around inside that engine, because that's all windage. Yeah,
I think right now they're up to the higher weight oils, but they're also running oil temperatures. Like if they come in to change tires if I come into the pits and my little race car is at 280 degrees oil temperature, I have a small panic attack, right?
Yeah.
If they come in and see 280 degrees oil, they're grabbing some tape and putting on the grill to get some more downforce.
Because they need it up over 300. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So Lake would tell you that, would go through there and give you this whole deal about viscosity versus temperature. So they may be running a relatively heavyweight oil, but at 300 degrees, it's super.
Yep.
It's double up there, right?
There's that classic curve where it just, it starts up here cold and ends up down here hot, and all the viscosities end up in the same place at 300 degrees.
10W40 at 300 and something degrees is pretty thin.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really hard concept for a lot of people to understand, just based on some articles that we've done. And it's really kind of a mind trip, because if you think about it, everybody's talking about multi-grades and they talk about how, 10W30 is acting the same as a 5W30, and they're like, wait, but the numbers are different, and they don't realize that elevated temperatures, they're both at 30s, but they're both thinner. I mean, I think I just did an article with who was it? But where we talked about that. But I think that's one of those concepts that just is intrinsically hard for a human mind to understand without a huge explanation.
And also, when you start with a relatively thin oil and put viscosity index improvers in it so that it thickens up as it gets hotter. Wait a minute, oil gets thinner. Well, it does, but then when you get above some set temperature, then it becomes thinner yet. So, exactly.
I mean, but at that point, is that kind of our fault out as the industry for using such casual terminology as it gets thicker? You know what I mean?
Yes. And that's tough. It's kind of like I've done this once, and it's an extremely hard story to write, which is like, let's go every step to put a small block Chevy distributor or a small block Ford, doesn't matter, in the engine and get it timed properly and set it in place. And if you do every single step, it's a small book when you're done. It's kind of like on Walden Pond, where I woke up and I put my left sock on, then I put my right sock on. It takes a long time to explain all that stuff. But so you have to make some assumptions that sometimes are dangerous. I did a story one time where I had one sentence. It was actually about cam timing, I believe, and the guy, the source I was using, came back to me and said, there's a whole book in that one sentence right there. I said, I know. I thought about taking it out, but I thought, no, I'm just going to leave it there and see if anybody noticed. He says, well, I noticed. I said, yeah, there's a whole nother story in that one sentence, but we can't go there because that's not what we're really talking about. So oftentimes I get people that will say, well, you left this part out. Well, yeah, because otherwise the story would be, if it was audio, it would be 3 hours long as opposed to 15 minutes. And we just can't do that. So,
no, I mean, I'm looking at this article, Jeff, I off the top of my head, not that I do this for a living or anything, I would imagine this is probably 3,000 word article. And I mean, you have direct quotes from Tom Lieb, John Kazi, all these experts.
Yeah.
So you're very thorough, but as thorough as you can be, to your point.
Right. Yeah. And then, just try and hit the high points. There's going to be a whole bunch of other things that somebody will always write in and say, well, you left this out. I call those errors of omission, and those are acceptable. Unless unless it's an error of omission that was intrinsic, and you somehow missed it. And that's happened. That's happened a couple of times. So it's hard. It's very hard.
I think the internet's favorite thing to do is point out anything that we miss. I mean,
and that's just normal, because someone's going to know that, and then you just pick up on it. But the Spinal Tap stories, I've worked with Billy on that quite a bit, and that was there's been about 3 or 4 in the last 5 years, one of the most difficult stories I ever had to write, because I am not a mathematician. That's why I became a journalist. So they were really difficult, but at the same time, it was a lot of fun. Learned a ton, And
I feel bad talking about Spinal Tap without Ben here.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he'll tell you it all started as like this joke bet, hold my beer thing, all combined. It was like we're both mourning the fact, some of the best experiences of my life were being in outside dyno cells when NHRA motors are going over 11,000. That somewhere around 10.5, Gabriel and all the angels clear their throat. And this beautiful music comes out. And it's talk about religion. That's a religious experience. If you don't love that, you really need to go take up a different career path. And so, NHRA, probably unbeknownst to them, they robbed that from me. And I was saying, it's really not that hard, Ben. And he's like, what about this? What about this? And we kept going like, I think somebody could do something that goes an inch lift at 11,000 RPM and make 50 passes on a set of springs. And he's like, let's try that. I'm like, well, man, I'm broke. I think I can get you some parts. You think you get the valvetrain parts? Yeah, I can see what I can beg, borrow, and steal. So after years of beg, borrowing, and stealing, Spinal Tap was born. So it was a really neat deal.
Billy, but I think the return on the investment was fantastic, though. I think perhaps not necessarily for whoever was supplying the parts, but
I'm not sure that everybody supplied the parts know that they supplied the parts. So
but nevertheless, as a kind of lifting up the entire pyramid of the learning process, just taking the whole thing and just lifting it up, which I think was fantastic. Just fantastic.
Oh no, we learned so much. Trying to make something this is going to be easy, realizing it's not easy, and then addressing each problem and trying to make things better. I mean, it changed so much that was kind of craft side that was unspoken and kind of brought it out into the mainstream. So it was a wonderful project for everyone involved.
Billy,
well, now I don't want to.
Not to cut you off, Greg, but outside of the implicit financial constraints that you just mentioned, what what were those challenges that you're just speaking of? What were unforeseen? What did you expect? And during the whole project, what were the hardest points?
Well, I mean, things like a steel lifter uncoated, moving in an iron lifter bore at those speeds. It was like the lifters would try, if you got anything goofy, the lifters would try to weld themselves into the bore at that speed. Things that you don't really think are possible, and you start doing the math and go, oh, that's moving fast. That, like we said, that V term, that V squared term, usually the exhaust profiles will go way higher than the intakes. But once we started going past 11, trying to find the limit speed, we started hurting exhaust parts that we've never hurt before. So, working on a valve spring package, he went ahead and the next article he did was on that low shock technology. We've been using that in some car applications and had been using it in a couple of pro stock cars. And so one of my buddies in the NASCAR world was like emailing Ben or, Facebook messaging Ben saying, Billy knows how to fix this. Tell him to bring out the new stuff. Like that stuff really happened. So
literally the Spinal Tap development process led to the low shock technology lobe.
The low shock technology lobes had been in professional racing, but it was totally proprietary and it wasn't something we talked about.
How cool is that?
Basically, Spinal Tap took a lot of things that were behind the curtain and brought them out front.
And was that intentional?
Everybody. I mean, we've sold a ton of camshafts because of Spinal Tap, and our customers are getting better parts today because of Spinal Tap, because it let us kind of commercialize something that was kind of going on more as just a very small group of professional racers were using it.
And that concept really was to not shock the spring, correct?
Right, and it's that old, back to the old guys. You remember that car that was it a Fairmont that Glidden had that didn't lose a race?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That engine had a messed up cam in it. Somehow a guy had gotten a master on backwards on the intake, and it had the long closing ramp on the opening side, and then it had the fast closing ramp on the fast opening ramp on the closing side. So this flipped over master got over to Glidden, and there's this one engine that was just wicked bad to the bone. And that car was wicked good, but that engine was wicked good too. And it wasn't for a year before he sent the cam back in that we measured it close enough. And this was when I was still like in elementary school, right? So, before we measured and realized that the lobe was on backwards, then we started to make a whole series of camshafts with flipped over lobes, basically. They were called our high-tech Dash 5 and things like that. And those were super popular from like 1980 to like about 1990, 1995. And then a new spring wire came out of Kobe, Japan. And in conjunction with PAC, it was doing this PAC alloy springs. And we came up with these springs that were so strong that those low shock lobes of the 80s weren't quick enough. So we had to do these faster series of lobes for these new springs. But then all of a sudden, over time, people start putting lighter and lighter springs, and engine speeds go up and up. And then everything that we had learned in 1980 but forgotten, we came back and redid it again and relearned it. So something Bob Glidden learned in 1985, we relearned in 2015. Yeah. And then by 2017, 2018, it's out there. It's the hottest new thing on the deal. And it's literally been around about as long as I have.
Yeah. How cool is that?
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It really is neat. The difference between the 80s versions of it and the new versions of it is now we understand, kind of like if you think about if you ever watch a real good drag race car leave the line, knowing with all the data they have now, they know where they can push it and where they can't. Jeff, you remember when guys would take the 289s and put the heavy flywheel and rev them up to the valve and drop the clutch? And
drop the clutch, yep.
Yeah. Now you look at an NHRA Pro Stocker and it just kind of just shoots out like an arrow, right? You look at a Pro Mod car, they just shoot out. And because they know where they can push and where they can't push. There's enough data, wheel speed analysis, G meters, they know exactly how to set the clutch. Very much like that. If you looked at our 1980 versions of the slow opening, faster closings versus our 2020 versions, the 2020s are more sophisticated, but they're more sophisticated because just like the good drag car, we can measure things better. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that that was the you wanted to talk, I don't know, for maybe jumping ahead, Vinny, or can we?
No, I was just about to lead into that. So
okay.
You guys you do a Spinal Tap, and that leads you to create this whole new line. In which Jeff addresses in another fantastic article called "Less Shock, More Awe: Comp's Latest Low Shock Technology Cam Magic." And it sounds like that's exactly what it is, but it's sort of like a recycled magic.
Yeah.
And Jeff, can you kind of walk us through the article, the outline, and what you attempted to?
This one, another one of those stories that were kind of happy accidents. Billy and I were talking about. I don't think we were actually talking about maybe we were talking about the low shock stuff a little bit. And I said, well, I've got a LS motor here with this camshaft that is probably now, I don't know, 10, 12 years old. And he said, well, I've got a low shock that's almost exactly the same. So let's do an A/B comparison. And I thought, this is fantastic. First of all, I don't have to change the cam in my motor right away. We can baseline that and then swap it on the dyno and see what it does. And the mistake I made in the story was I cluttered it up with a bunch of other stuff. And what I should have done, Billy, was I should have just done that story on the cam. And that would have and we could have saved that other stuff for later. But I'm always trying to do as much stuff as I can, in one story. So, but the concept was, if you just look at the cam card, and this brings up a whole nother issue, but which is great information. If you looked at the numbers on the cam cards, I should have them in front of me. I didn't bring them out, but they were almost identical. I think maybe intake closing was a couple of degrees changed from the baseline cam, which was I want to say an is that LLR?
LRR, yep.
Yeah, and then to the LST. The lobe separation angle was a couple of degrees different, but I think the low shock cam was actually had a couple of thousandths less lift. But for all intents and purposes, they were identical. And so if you were to take the two cam cards and show them to, a sharp engine guy, he would go, "You're not going to see anything. Why are you even bothering? Yeah, the lobe separation angle changed a little bit. That'll move the torque curve around a little bit. But other than that, you're not going to see anything." Well, we pulled it. I just pulled it up on my other screen over here, and it was, we did the comparison, didn't change anything else, and the motor picked up 15 horsepower at the top.
That's
15
great.
horsepower. And Steve pulled the hammer and went, "Let me see those specs again." And I said, "Look here, the numbers don't change." And he goes, "You got the right cam? You put a bigger cam in the box. You just screwed this up." And no, I double checked this. And it's like, he said, "We got to pull this again." Pulled it again, and it made the same power. And it was like, wow, and I was stunned. I expected to see 4 or 5, something like that. I would have been thrilled with 4 or 5. We saw 15. Oh, holy crap! What's going on here? And the bad things, the XDA push rods and the BSR thing, and I should have just left it alone, because this was a fantastic story, and unfortunately I think part of it got buried, but that aside, if you look at the graphs and if you read the story, there it is. I mean, it was shocking. It was shocking,
To say how shocking it was, Steve and I are good friends, so he calls up my cell phone and has me pull up the AGCOL check sheets on both camshafts. You heard me, Billy. No, the AGCOL sheet on both of them. Here's the serial number. Here's what it checked. I can't make that machine lie. This is really what it checked. Yeah.
And so we were shocked, because when you do enough testing, and especially when you look at the numbers on the cards, so the point of that is that you can no longer use that as an evaluating tool. The lobe shape is so critical, and you can't see that. And then I think, because I remember right around this same time, I had this brilliant idea, which became stupid when we did this test, was, well, how about we look at grade camshafts by looking at the lift at 200, or the duration at 200. It's like, no, throw that out, because it doesn't work now.
Well, it's funny too, like we're doing some work with the university, and he's looking at seat timing and everything right now. Mm-hmm. And trying to explain to him that just because you tell something to move doesn't mean it moves.
Right.
So,
right.
Because if you looked at you looked at LRR cam, and you have to understand the LRR cam in like 2013, I gave an AETC presentation, the Advanced Engineering Technology Conference. I gave a presentation on that lobe design. In 2013, it was the hottest lobe design on the planet. There was nothing out there better in 2013. And it was way better than anything before that. And, I was looking back over that presentation. But what we didn't understand then, if you look at the LRR, it was actually smaller advertised duration than the new low shock by like 5 degrees. It's probably the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. If you run these on the Spintron, you'll see that low shock deal, just because you start telling it to move early, it's not really moving the valve. It's loading the push rod, and the little hydraulic puck in there, it kind of goes down just a little bit and locks up. and then it loads the push rod, and it bends a little bit, and the push rod seats into the rocker, it loads the rocker, and it bends a little bit, and everything kind of gets all wound up before it starts moving off the seat. And we jokingly called that internally, instead of low shock, we called it crack and whack. Everything up till it's just about to crack, and then we push it, and that whole deal of, but if you look at the advertised number, it'd say, hey, this opens the valve a lot earlier. No, it really doesn't. It just gets everything loaded and then accelerates. And it makes that valve opening event much more controlled than a crash. With the older deal, it kind of crashes. And when it crashes like that, it sends shock through the whole system. And so the push rod's vibrating, the rocker's vibrating, the spring's vibrating, and then you don't have as good a control on the closing side. And you tell the intake valve to close on the other side. And if it just burps just a little bit, that little bit of power that you said, that 10 horsepower, 15 horsepower, that can be just the intake valve bouncing 10 thousandths and letting a little bit of that charge back out.
Yeah.
Jeff,
so by accurately closing it, then you're capturing
really
that cylinder pressure, and that's really where the power comes from. Yeah.
Jeff, yesterday you were explaining a little bit about how this mitigates or it can mitigate valve float, or how some people misunderstand how they're related. Yeah.
Well, in float, I think the old explanation or the old understanding of it was really loft, where you lofted the lifter and the push rod and everything else off the end of the lobe, and then somewhere on the closing side it came back down. And well, that does occur, but the reality of, correct me if I'm wrong, Billy, but the reality of valve float really is when that intake valve doesn't stay closed, it bounces. So you see this little bump after it's supposed to close, and then you see it come back up, and it could only be 10 thousandths of an inch, but it's still losing cylinder pressure while it's doing that. And then that, I think you told me that sends another shock wave through the spring as if it had gone through its entire lift curve, correct?
Yes, it sees the bounce events just like opening events. It counts every time the coils are surging and hitting each other. It counts that as a cycle. And the other thing is, like with hydraulic systems, and we always knew, even going back to like the 409, how it go to a certain RPM that it just like make the little Eeyore clouds over the carburetors, fuel clouds over it. What we didn't understand about hydraulics is hydraulics the check valving system will work even on valve bounce. So if you bounce the valve up before it comes back down, the hydraulic system can fill in and catch it. Bounces up, this comes in, and then it leaves the valve, instead of open 10 degrees, it can leave it up 40 degrees.
Yeah.
It's just not all that time that you should be making cylinder pressure. Instead of making cylinder pressure, you're forcing air back into the intake manifold, and you're disrupting the whole flow. That same deal that makes that Eeyore carburetor is making everything ticked off in the plenum.
Yeah. So it's such a simple thing, and yet look how much power it was worth. I mean, how much would we struggle to make 15 additional horsepower at 550 horsepower?
No, I don't think people understand that. Like, people will do bad things for 15 horsepower when you talk about that bit of an engine. It's really hard to get it.
And then, and this would kind of been a part 2 for the story, which we didn't do, which is like, well, now look how much more stable it is, which is giving us that extra power. Now that really means if we have a stable valvetrain, we can spin this thing another 500 to 700 to 1,000 RPM higher, and it might still be stable. And now, how much power are we making?
Right, and not only that, think of it. The crazy thing is, Jeff, we don't have to go back that long, and we'd remember that when we used to try to get a cam to make more power, it tore up more parts. Remember we put 30,000 slash in these super stock things and make it a little bit faster down the track, but it'd tear up springs. This new technology actually can make the 15 more horsepower, but because the lifter's not getting this big gap between the lobe and the lifter and crashing, the valve seat's not crashing, the spring's not surging, all this, every part of your valve train is actually going to last longer too. So you end up with this, like compared to that LRR cam, you can get more miles out of it. You can have less chance of a parts failure, and you make the power.
Yeah,
it's so interesting.
Probably the coolest as a design engineer, that's probably the coolest part of this technology.
Billy, I want you to kind of explain this low shock technology for the layman, but Jeff did such a good job leading into it, and I want to read his intro because it was touching on exactly what you were just saying. He says, the line used by a CNN reporter during the early morning air attacks of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003 was shock and awe, the use of overwhelming force in the face of an enemy. As we move into the 21st century and enter the second 100 years of internal combustion engine development, that caveman technique of using overwhelming force to control a valve train is quietly being replaced with what could be described as engineered finesse, to your point. So then he goes on, he says, Comp's valve train engineer group manager, Billy Godbold, and his team have been flogging valve trains for years in a search for the next breakthrough in valve train technology. Recent advancements in testing have led to what Comp now calls low shock technology. So we've been talking about this for a little while, but could you sum up what low shock technology is in the most basic of terms?
The most basic of terms is prior designs would get a running start to try to jump the valve off the seat. And that was, like we talked about, going full circle back to piston technology. When all the other components had a lot of issues, this was an important way of accomplishing what we needed to accomplish. But now that we have better parts throughout the engine, bigger cam journals, better valve springs, better rockers, stiffer valve train components, everything like that, we found there's actually a better way to do it. So that's where we are today. That instead of just crashing it and crashing it off the seat, we finesse it off the seat. We get everything loaded before, and then it operates harder just a little bit later. Without giving away every little nuance to what we're doing, we really are trying to compress everything before we really jump on the gas. And it's very much like looking at a 1980s gasser where it pulled the front end, 40 feet in the air, it seemed like, versus a modern pro mod car where the front wheels are off the ground for the first, 600 feet, but they're never 4 inches off the ground. Everything is very, very controlled.
Interesting.
And then as a result, you don't need the caveman giant stone valve spring. You don't need super heavy valve spring. So you take the loads off the valve train. Now with years of building valve trains to be stiff enough to handle those big springs, now you're starting to back the spring up. Now everything's really, really strong and stable and does what you want it to do consistently over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. So it lives longer. So it's better and it lives longer.
Right. And that was the thing. Back to Spinal Tap, was one of the goals was 1 inch of lift, 11,000 RPM, but 50 passes on a set of valve springs. You know what I mean? Because we figured out, how many passes you could make in a weekend, how many times would you have a car like this out, how can we go almost a full year without changing springs?
And I mean, that's such a huge change, because I mean, I don't know if our listeners are super familiar with that level of racing, but I mean, there's people who would change valve springs every 8 passes, maybe. I mean,
a pro stock guy got mad when it was 3, because 3 is really hard for them to deal with. If you know how the event works, if you're not a very high dollar team, you get 4 qualifying passes. Well, it's no fun if you go and make 3, then you put a new set of springs and you only get 2 passes out of it because you're probably going out first round. Do you change springs before the next event, or you try to get one more deal in it? Yeah. But if you're a really good team, it's a mess because you put in new springs for Sunday, right? And you think you're going to go all 4 rounds. But the way NHRA does, they run pro stock last in the semifinals and first in the finals to give the fuel teams more time. And there's hardly time to change springs between semifinals and finals. So the magic rule for NHRA Pro Stock was they wanted 4 laps on a set, 4 passes, on a set of valve springs.
I thought it was an exaggeration here, Jeff, when you wrote, as an example of this approach, consider that not long ago, NHRA Pro Stock racers considered it as successful if they could coax a set of valve springs to last more than one pass. But evidently, that's true.
I just remember being the news staffer at Carcraft Magazine in 1980 and just watching this flurry of activity in the Pro Stock pits. Always was about changing valve springs.
Right.
Yeah.
John Lingenfelter could tell you which spring was going to break first on the Pro Stock and Copland Air motors. Oh, that's number 7 that went out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it ran 1 less mile per hour. Yeah, you got a broken inner on 7. Yeah. It's like,
and that's just because he'd been there so many times that he just knew. Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Because we have people that ask us all the time. It's like, how do you know all this stuff? It's like, well, because I've stepped on those landmines 2 or 3 times. I've blown my foot off 3 times, so I've learned finally not to do that. It's not that we're that much smarter. It's just that we've been there before.
We've had that many times going, uh-oh.
Yeah. And especially when it's like, it's the most frustrating when it's like, 10 years ago, I got away with this. Now I don't, and I don't understand why. And it's, and it's the learning process. Like, well, we're making, you're making another, I don't know, 20 more horsepower, and there's that much more heat in the chamber, and all of a sudden it's burning up a spark plug that used to be able to live with, and now it won't. So there you go.
So, you guys have effectively, like you said, Billy, you guys have sold a ton of these low shock cams. You guys are Spinal Tap is done, but sort of not. Jeff, you were alluding to maybe doing something more with it. What's going on?
Well, I think we're waiting, because I think he ran it once and wasn't happy with it. And so I've never really gone back for the final story, which was, here it is running, because he ran it once. And then there was some issue with it. I forget what it was, but he wanted to have that solved. And I've been sworn to secrecy. He's doing some things that are very cool. But he doesn't want me to talk about yet. I just happened to run across the photos again today when I was searching for this other stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I need to ask you about that. That was 4 or 5 months ago.
The great thing about Spinal Tap is it's not for a class of racing. So it doesn't have, like if you're doing something for the Indy 500, except for this year, there's a date in May they're going to race that daggone thing, right? So you got to be Daytona. When they're going to have that race, and you've got to be ready for that race. Spinal Tap, because it's really a plaything and it's not for any particular race or any particular class, it gets to kind of have its own life and not be as strict. And I think, because we were trying to get it just to run there and do that, once we got that done, you start looking, well, it doesn't make peak power at 11. What can we do to make the power as impressive as the RPM? And so I think Spinal Tap, version 3 or whatever it is on now, that every version of Spinal Tap is going to be a bigger, badder boy for a long time.
Right. That was part of the confusion with that story also, what people were saying, well, that head's not really going to work at 11,000 RPM. It's like, no, it's not. It's for making power.
I had a set of those though.
Yeah. But we had them, so we're going to use them. And so I mean, again, it's like it's a science project, right? It's not. Right. We're not trying to go out and drop the ET record in Pro Stock. We're not trying to do that. So it's fun how it was a pure science project. Let's just do this for the sake of learning, and that's one of the things that I really like, because I've had 100 ideas of things I wanted to do that are strictly for a learning process, and half the time can't do them just because they're going to cost so much. And when you're done, it's like you learn something, but at what cost? And it's like, because I still have to keep the lights on around here. So, it's really a lot of fun when you get a chance to kind of tag along. And that's all I really did, was just tag along to what you and Ben did, but to write about it. And that was the fun part.
You guys have only run it once?
Yeah. They ran it on the Spintron.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it's only run.
Right. It ran on the dyno for one season before, one group of sessions before it got torn down. And now it's kind of gone into this whole deal like a $6 million man,
right. And it's probably those things where, well, now that learning, whatever that learning process developed, was now said, okay, just like that opening the door concept, right? It's like, well, now there's 15 more things for us to look at, and which one do we deal with first?
You said that it didn't make peak at 11. Where did it make peak?
I think the peak was down just in the low 9s. So
yeah.
Because he was starting the dyno at peak horsepower.
Yeah,
because he was starting the dyno at like 8. I mean,
imagine starting at 9,000. Yeah. So and that confused a lot of people, because it was like, well, wait a minute, it's not making any power up there. I was like, well, it wasn't supposed to do. I was like, well, why? What are you doing this? Well, just to see if it would do it.
Yeah. To see
right. Have you not seen the movie Spinal Tap?
Right.
Did you just make 10 louder?
But it's 11. It's 11.
Yeah. That was the joke, guys.
Yes, exactly. So I actually have a question for Bill. I sent you this email a couple of weeks ago about a big block Chevy. So is the LST going to evolve into other lines of camshafts for other families of engines? Because right now, I think it's just LS and then the Hemi, correct? The Gen 3 Hemi?
Right, LS, the Hemi, and the new 2018 Up Coyotes and the Voodoo.
Okay. Yeah.
We have it in for those 3 applications. But on the race side, there is absolutely a ton of lobes that are being used. I mean, most of our bracket race guys that have been using like the RX XCX for years, they're using it. A ton of our circle track guys. We had one of my good friends that does build circle track races. He races engines. He calls me up and he said, Billy, I've never sold an engine after a cam change until this event. I sent the guy out there on the track with the new engine with the new cam in it, and he instantly signed. He came off the track and signed the contract for the whole year.
Wow.
He goes, I've never had a cam do that for me again. And some of the things we're doing with that low shock, I was talking about like a snowball going downhill. When you first start rolling the snowball, you don't pick up a whole lot of mass right at first. And the same thing happens with the airflow because of the exhaust pressure and everything. You need to start that port moving, but you're not moving a lot of air around top dead center. But getting that snowball started really, really helps these things. And that's kind of what we're seeing, that the drivers are seeing, especially like in the circle track where they have the throttle changes and everything like that. When they put the low shock in the circle track, they're seeing the engine respond better coming off the corners. So, that if you look at the power on the dyno and then you go look at the track times, you look at the dyno and you say, that thing could be worth, a tiny, tiny bit on the track. And then you look on the track and you look at the time difference and you're like, this time difference is way better than the power says it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And because, getting that little bit of earlier start is just helping the overlap triangle shape, helping the exhaust and the intake work together, helping improve some volumetric efficiency, especially under part throttle transient times. And we've seen that in drag racing as well. Shift recovery, like one of the main things in a manual shifted car is that 2-3 shift. If it stumbles at 2-3, Jeff, you remember this going back to complimentary days and pro stock days. If it stumbles on that gear change, it's not going to go fast. And you'll see, because the guy's right next to you, and you see him scooch out in front of you right there. And, that this technology is doing some good things, not just on the valvetrain side, not just in the peak power, but very much on the transients as well.
And it fills in with that whole symbiotic relationship thing where we're never just dealing with one system, but it's integration into the entire system of the entire engine. And every time you can do that from a positive standpoint, you're gonna see the gains just stack up on top of each other.
Yeah, it goes back to like that deal you talked about, the connecting rod we started with. When people changed piston designs, they made that boxy piston, right? Mm-hmm. That boxy piston had a shorter pin with thicker walls that let them guide there. That let them narrow up the bottom, but then they gained more because they could really narrow up the bottom. sometimes a little change here can make a build a ton of changes going forward.
Yeah.
Bill, you said that you guys have them for Gen 3 Hemi, the latest iteration of the Coyote, and you mentioned the LS too. Does that also go for the LT?
Oh, yes, you're right. We do have it on the LS and the LT.
Okay, very cool.
All the the 5.3s, the 6.2s, everything in between, and the new LT stuff.
Fantastic.
And then those other lobe families that you mentioned, because what we talked about was I sent you an email about, well, have you got something like that for like a big block Chevy, and
right, and that's getting really popular. We're everything we're doing the race side is custom grind on the solid rollers, but the hydraulic rollers will be coming out for other applications later too. So all of it's really building up, and we've been building more custom cams and things like that. It's just it's one of those things where you're always a little bit concerned about showing too much on the street stuff, because people do tend to, I wish I got commission on every camshaft that we don't sell that I designed,
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You guys, we could talk about this for another hour, but I really appreciate your time. As we wrap up here, do you guys have any final thoughts on any of these articles that we discussed or the technology that we discussed?
I just want to just push it harder. While we're sitting here talking about this, I'm thinking I should go up at least another 6 degrees. Let's try that. Because it's never enough. I made 15. Well, maybe I could make 30. We spin it harder. I mean, yeah. I've now got that motor that we tried it in. That's a forged piston LS motor, so I could take that thing to 7 and it would be happy. It'd be fine.
Yep.
So yeah. So
I know, Greg.
It's already in the car, so I don't really want to change it.
Yeah. In which car, Jeff?
And the orange 66.
Oh yeah.
So we did a bunch of my buddy John Kilgore built a super light transmission. So we did some testing there, and he takes a bunch of mass out of the transmission because the Turbo 400s are really heavy. And unfortunately, my car is not really fast enough to really take an advantage of it. But we picked up over a 10th, and but unfortunately, driver error. The motor we had in the car was a previous engine, and it was running essentially like 1080s. And but when we went to the manual shift, it's reverse valve body, and my first pass, you know what's coming. So reverse manual valve body. For 30 years, I've been driving my car where I bring it down into first gear and I ratchet up, right? And I'm sitting and staging thinking, don't screw this up, pull back, so I'm talking to myself. And stage the car, everything's fine. The car leaves and it hooks and everything's working. I mean, you can feel it. It is strong. And I just went boom without thinking. And it went right to the moon. 8,000 RPM on a cast piston LS motor. It didn't scatter it. It should have, but it didn't. but it hurt it, and it took about 4 more passes. When we started seeing the mile per hour start, every pass it gets slower and slower and slower. And I go, okay, we heard it. Let's take it home and figure it out. And it took about 1/4 of the upper ringland right out of number 7.
Oh.
Well, and it's gone. I don't know where it went, but it's little chunks of it were in the exhaust valve. But so I got lucky. It should have scattered it, but it didn't. So.
Well, if you got to rebuild, then at least it sounds like you got your valve train figured out.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Go bigger.
Yes, go bigger.
That's really cool, guys. Hey, Jeff, I've been dying to ask you this whole time we've been sitting here talking. Is that like a T-shirt of yours sitting behind you? I see the word Smith.
Oh, over here. Yeah, that's my son's. Shall I grab it real quick and show it to you?
Yeah.
Here. So my son is a professional MMA fighter. So it says Graham the Stalker awesome. Smith. And so we made him a bunch of T-shirts, and we got to make up a new one now because this is back when he was an amateur. He's now a professional. He's 1-0. And then a tree fell on his truck and almost killed him about a month ago.
I think that tree makes him 2-0. He won.
Yeah. Well, actually, his first email to me or text actually in the hospital was Graham 0 Tree 1. So yeah, it was that big storm they had about a month ago in the Midwest that flattened all the crops and knocked a tree down while he was on his way to training and destroyed his truck. So we've got him a new truck now, and he's going to be fine. He was in the hospital for a couple of days, but he's going to be fine. So it clipped the T11, his spinal. So it compressed his spine and crushed the cab of the truck. It should have killed him, but it didn't. And he crawled out, and so he's fine.
But that's why he won.
That's why he won. Yes. Because the tree didn't kill him. So
it's just some of those shirts when you get them made, Jeff.
Yeah. I'll send you one because we're doing some new ones here pretty quick, but. Because it's a lot of fun. I've got a couple here. I can send you one. Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, he's
love that.
He's having fun. I don't know where it comes from. It doesn't come from me because he likes to get in the ring and get the snot beat out of him.
I don't know, Jeff. You duke it out with these keyboard warriors.
Yeah. So, but he gets in a cage all by himself, and you either win or you lose, and it's all up to you. So it's there's a lot to be said for that. I had a. I don't know if you got a real quick. This is an example of that, but I had a good friend of mine who was a school principal, high school principal, who was also a drag racer, and this is all about participation. And these English teachers came to him one day and said, the football coach, he doesn't do anything. All he does is coach football. I mean, how tough is that? And he gets essentially gets paid the same, and he's just here during the day. He doesn't do anything, and so we're here to complain. And he said, well, okay, let's do it this way then. I want to illustrate to you just what his challenges are. So I will accept your complaints about that and maybe change it if you're willing to do one thing. And the English teacher says, well, what? She says, you take your English class, your best English class, and you put them up every Friday night against the school, crosstown school. And if they win, it's because the kids were so smart. If they lose, it's because their coach sucked, right? so that there's the deal, right? Because how many times is it, the team loses? Well, the coach just didn't coach them right because these kids are the greatest kids in the world. And if they win, it's because the kids are so great. And there's a lot of truth in that. So English teacher, if you're willing to put your kids up every Friday night, then we'll talk about this. And I was like, well, we're not going to do that because it takes a lot of work. And what if we lose? Yeah, it's because the coach sucked. And they all back down. So it's all about participation. It's all about putting it out there in the line. Those kids are out there playing. The drag racers are out there racing, and they're doing it. They're not just sitting back and talking about it on the internet. So it's you gotta walk the walk, right? So he's out there walking the walk, because when he's in that cage and every time he gets this cage, these guys are always bigger than him, and it's like, oh my God, that guy's a monster, And I mentioned it to him, and he goes, Dad, they're all big. They're all big. Oh my God. So my alma mater played football on last weekend, and they've got a couple of new tight ends. These kids are 6'7", 310, and they're tight ends. These guys are my kid. He's a big guy. He's 6'1", 260. These guys are 6'7", 310, and they're tight ends. They're not guards. They're tight ends. My Lord.
That's insane.
Yeah,
well, that's really cool, Jeff. So there you have it, everybody. You got to put it all on the line, like Jeff said. You got to put it all out there.
Yep.
I don't think that this will be the last time that we have either of you on the show. Again, from the bottom of my heart, I got to thank both of you guys so much for making time to do this. I know that you guys are both very busy gentlemen, and so it means a lot to me and Greg that you guys would make time to do this.
Well, that's a lot of fun.
Just know that, I don't say that, I probably say this too much or don't say it enough, but, I was a young guy reading all of Jeff's articles, and you have to understand that I wouldn't have chosen the career that I chose without what I got from him when I was much younger, and growing into this, kind of becoming, I guess, somebody in our industry, and the friendships I have with guys like Jeff through this deal, man, it'll make you young. I was talking to Ed Pink the other day, my buddy. He's 90 years old. You know what I mean?
Is he 90 now? Oh,
he's about to be 90.
Wow.
I had breakfast with Ed Iskandarian the other day at
Lucky.
Yes.
He's like 99. You know, if you want, I'm 50 and I feel like a kid. You know, if you want to have a career where you get to stay young and enjoy and want to get in that cage and swing, do it. Ed and Jeff and I have done. You know, get into these engines and you will never work a day in your life. And it's just we are so excited about jumping in the ring tomorrow.
Yep, exactly.
Putting it all on the line, getting knocked around a little bit, hoping and knowing we're going to learn something, so we're going to be better next time we get in that ring.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. And Billy, I would really love to have you on another time where we can dive a little bit deeper into your background and what brought you here, because you know, I know that you're like a rocket scientist and a zoologist and a geologist and all these things, and so I would love to learn more about that.
Yeah.
Well, just know that we love what you guys are doing. It makes our industry a better place. We're very thankful, and not a single one of us wants to grow up and get a real job.
That's right. That's right.
If it keeps you out of a real job, we're on.
Yeah, my friends tell me all the time, "You don't have a real job." I said, "You're absolutely correct. I don't. I don't have a real job."
That sounds bad.
I think that's probably a good place to end for now. Greg and I are going to do a quick wrap up, but if you guys don't mind hanging out for just a moment, we'll be right with you. Is that cool?
Sure.
Great.
So there you have it, Greg. Another fantastic episode. This time with two titans of tech.
For sure. I mean,
well, three if we count you. Me, I'm
no. How many
questions.
times have I said that? Like, and now you're going to try to do it while they're here? No. Nope.
You're like a baby titan. You're like you're the mini titan.
What is a baby titan called? Is there a name for a baby titan?
Demigod.
Really? I'll trust you on that.
I think Hercules was a demigod.
Yeah, but that's because he was half god.
He's half human, half god.
Okay.
And so the titans are all gods. So if you're like a baby god, then
I don't know my Greek mythology at all. Or was that Roman? It's Greek, right?
Hercules is Greek.
Okay.
I think. I don't know.
Can we talk about camshafts now? I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Look, man, my brain is fried trying to keep up with these two titans of tech, like I said. But yeah, no, what a fantastic episode, man. You know, I wanted to do one like this for a while. I know you did too.
Yep.
They dove into the minutia and they put it into terms that a slow guy like myself can understand. So I hope all of our audience and fans at home are as appreciative as I am, because we made it happen. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And
Greg,
these are the kind of episodes that are like at my warm heart, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And the thing is, I really hope everybody kind of follows along, because I know, you know, these kind of conversations just kind of spiral into whatever direction they're going to go.
No, I think we addressed some really good talking points, and those 3 articles that we mentioned, we're going to drop the link in the comment section below. So do yourself a favor, go check out those articles, so you know firsthand what we're talking about in the episode. I think the episode stands alone, but you can go back and read those articles and I mean, grow your wealth of knowledge, because I mean, an 11,000 RPM LS, like, that's pretty cool, man. So, you know, that 15,000 shares on that single article. I mean, people want to know more about it. And so I'm sure our audience will be grateful. But that said, what else do we have going on Engine Labs, man? What can the people go check out right now on enginelabs.com?
Right now, we actually have some cool stuff. We have an article with Cometic gaskets about a non-head gasket tech, and that kind of stems from having a conversation with them and saying something to the effect of, well, it's just an oil pan gasket. And it was like, what do you mean just an oil pan gasket? Like, how dare you insinuate that, you know, we don't put technology into these other gaskets? And then we started talking about it, and I realized why there was that reaction. There's a ton of technology in the other. There's no such thing as only an intake gasket or only an exhaust gasket or only an oil pan gasket. They put so much R&D into that stuff. And so we talked about it, you know. I know my eyes were open, you know, learning about it. So there's that, which is pretty cool. And I know, again, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's an intake gasket. How much technology can
that stuff is totally cool. I did an article a while back with Taylor Gaskets on their exhaust manifold gaskets. And there was like, their product line is enormous, all catering to different people who are building different engines. So totally get it, man. That's really cool. What else is going on?
And then it should be live by the time this is live. It's a recap of Holdener's video where he puts different length push rods on the dyno to see what happens. I feel like I could probably sum it up in about 2 sentences, so I won't, because I don't want to ruin the article. But it's really interesting, and it actually goes back to Billy because Richard talked to Billy. And it's a simple concept that I think we all try to make more complicated than it is. When you boil it down, what's happening in the valve train, which is one of the reasons Billy is Billy, because he understands inherently that valve train stuff and can explain it to us, who are like, well, if I put this in there, why does it make more power? It's like,
if I told Billy I wanted, if I wanted the chop, could he give it to me?
He might give you the chop for saying that, but yes, I'm sure he can give you just the chop if that's all you want.
No, man, talking to him was a lot of fun. Everybody at home, if you liked our conversation today, keep an eye out for a future episode where we hopefully can coax Billy to come back on and give us his backstory, because I know he piqued my interest, and so I know that you guys all want to know his backstory as well. As for streetmusclemag.com, right now, go check it out. Don't waste any time. After this episode is done, go to streetmusclemag.com and check out the latest article from Rob Finkelman, who you guys will remember from a previous episode. Rob's movie review, car movie review, excuse me. Really cool article on a movie called Getaway. It's actually a newer movie, which is a bit of a departure for Rob. He likes the old stuff, which is totally cool, but he did a fantastic job on this article, so go check it out. Also, you can read my recap. By the time this airs, it'll be up. My recap of the GT500 North American Track Tour, where I went up to Sonoma Raceway and drove the new GT500 around Sonoma Raceway. That was a fantastic experience. Read all about that super muscle car.
I'm still jealous. Oh, we didn't ask about the super muscle car, because remember, we were going to talk to Jeff about the Pro Touring and creating a new name. And
you're giving away too much of my article, Greg.
They watched last week, so they know what's going on.
Don't argue with us. The GT500 is a super muscle car. That's it. Greg, for all of our viewers, listeners at home, when and where can they watch our episodes?
Noon Pacific time, Facebook, and YouTube.
Yes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Drop a like. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let us know who you want us to have on. Let us know what you think of the episode. Let us know what you want to talk about next. Subscribe, like, share.
Hit the bell.
Yeah.
Get notifications. You can't just like it. You can't just subscribe. You got to hit the bell. Otherwise, it doesn't give you notifications.
And all that other stuff that everybody tells us to say in our videos. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I had a really good time making it. So did Greg. And I hope I can speak for Jeff and Billy when I say that they did too.
I think that's a safe bet.
And that's it. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for watching.
See you next week.